Gen Zers are getting fired at record rates, but it's not entirely their own fault. A wild survey on Gen Z in the workplace, Trump triggers critics with a controversial plan, and a TikToker says that pronouns don't actually equal gender after all. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics, all from an independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around, and regardless, do hit that like button to reward my suffering as we go through today's stuff, and do comment with your thoughts. I do take the time to read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode, so do leave a comment with your thoughts as we go, because I always do like hearing what you guys have to say. And now we've got to talk about Gen Z, because a new survey from Intelligent.com of 1,000 employers just came out with some pretty shocking findings suggesting that Gen Z is being fired at record rates. Companies are axing Gen Z workers just months after hiring them fresh from college, a new report has found, according to the Daily Mail. 6 in 10 employers had already fired some college graduates they had recruited earlier in the year, a survey conducted by Intelligent.com found. 1 in 7 of the employers said they also might not hire fresh college grads next year after finding a raft of problems with young workers. So this is a pretty glaring finding, and it really does suggest that employers are having a tough time finding good candidates, and that new hires from Gen Z fresh out of college, at least a significant chunk of them, aren't transitioning well and aren't adapting well to the workplace, which is pretty obviously a big concern. But why? Why is there this disconnect? Why aren't things working out? Well, business leaders listed concerns in areas such as communication skills and professionalism that made them wary of hiring Gen Z. They also said the workers of that age are often unmotivated and need to constantly be told what to do, rather than using their initiative, as that's another issue. I'm curious for your thoughts, all of y'all in the audience. Have you worked with Gen Z people, and do you encounter these attitudes at all? This needing to be told everything to do, this lack of independence, this lack of work ethic. I think, you can't generalize an entire generation, but I've definitely encountered some young people who do fall into this mold. Now, the authors of the Intelligent.com survey suggest that part of what's creating this disconnect, this mismatch, is actually the education system that's failing to prepare people for the workforce. Many recent college graduates may struggle with entering the workforce for the first time, as it can be a huge contrast from what they're used to throughout their education journey, Intelligent.com wrote in the report. They're often unprepared for a less structured environment, workplace cultural dynamics, and the expectation of autonomous work. This survey really does suggest that things are just not going well for Gen Zers in the workplace. 3/4 of companies surveyed said all or some of their recent graduate hires were unsatisfactory in some way, and half said their Gen Z hires had a lack of motivation, making them difficult to work with. Yikes. This is not a good finding and does not bode well for Gen Z's future in the economy and in the workplace. And I think it is indicative of something of a widespread problem. We hear this isn't the first survey. It's not just a few businesses. It's over 1,000, and they're all kind of saying the same thing, or at least most of them, that they are encountering problems with the next generation of workers. And we should talk about why that is, without falling into the trope of, all Gen Zers are just lazy, all kids these days are all just spoiled. It's more complicated than that. It's more nuanced than that, but also Gen Zers should take accountability and responsibility for the fact that they are doing some things wrong. At least some of them certainly are, and if we want to succeed, we have to put in more and give more of ourselves and do better than some of these young people clearly are doing. But on a systemic level, how did we get here to this mismatch? Well, I think one of the big problems has to be the higher education system, the college system in America. It is supposed to prepare young people for life in the real world, for jobs after they graduate. That's the whole point that most people go to college. Most people these days don't go to college because they just want to spend a couple years reading Shakespeare or Plato or whatever, but because they want to get a good job after they graduate after 4 years. That's why they're paying so much money. That's why they're taking on so much debt that they can't really afford to pay back in some cases. That's why they're doing it, to get a good job, to succeed in the workplace after graduation. But colleges aren't really setting them up for success after they leave because the college atmosphere is so detached from reality. It's so different than the actual real world or your working life that you're jumping out of one scenario into another one, and the two barely resemble each other. I mean, most colleges have become almost infantilizing in the way they treat 18, 19, and 20-year-old adults. They're safe spaces where nobody's going to get their feelings hurt. They coddle them like little children. I mean, I will never forget this. This was actually my first kind of foray into the media world while I was still in college. But my dorm at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, when I was in my second year there, I was living in a dorm where there were sophomores and juniors on campus. And the RA, as part of the housing program, that they did this on every floor, but this particular RA, with their creative direction, decided to put up Care Bears on the hall, throughout the hall, decorations. And each one had a special message for the students, like, make sure to drink water every day, and make sure to brush your teeth, and make sure to sleep at least 8 hours a night, and all these other ridiculous things that I was like, this is so absurd. We're adults. We're not toddlers. Why are they treating us like we're little kids? We're supposed to be young adults making our way through the world, not basically big-bodied infants who needed to be coddled like we were in daycare. And I actually tweeted some images of these, and it went mega viral, and I actually went on Fox News for the first time to discuss it. So yeah, flashback to the OG Brad Polumbo lore that most of y'all will probably not know. Here's my legacy as the Care Bears kid.
Well, we have to talk about it again. Campus craziness being taken to a whole nother level. Do you remember the Care Bears?
And send a wish out.
I was saying I find that song creepy. Well, now an honors dorm at the University of Massachusetts Amherst is using the Care Bears for stressed out students, helping them cope. So has the campus coddling finally gone too far? Bradley Polumbo is a student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and he joins us now live. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
So you live in this dorm, and you're on the hall where this Care Bear poster has been put up?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually in the dorm that I live in, right just a few doors down from my dorm room. And so we're in the middle of finals week at UMass, and this is part of the, the posters that RAs will put out to deal with stress management and those types of things. But my RA took it about 10 times too far.
This is crazy. We're taking a look at it. Describe it for us exactly what this is meant to do. So it has the different Care Bears on it, and it has what, inspirational or uplifting messages for each one?
Yeah, so I guess it's meant to uplift students or encourage them, but it's really just condescending. It's got these colorful Care Bears that coddle students and tell them to eat healthy, to make time for exercise, and to make sure to have fun, and most importantly, to let the Care Bears help. And I've just got to say, that's all great advice, but it was great advice when my first grade teacher told it to me when I was 6.
So is this just an indication of, I don't want to be called snowflakes because it hurts mentally. We did that story the other day. But they've just taken things too far.
Yeah, I think they have taken it too far, and mental health issues are serious. And I get the point here, but I've got to say that this level, this Care Bear coddling, it's just offensive and condescending. The people that live in my building were 20 or 21 years old. We could be overseas fighting in the military. We could be working full time, or we could even have 2 kids running around that we have to take care of. But apparently, if we're students at the University of Massachusetts, we need Care Bears that coddle us. I think that's insane.
Yeah, so I would get mocked on campus for the next several years as the Care Bear kid or the kid who got triggered by Care Bears. And in some sense, yeah, do I roll my eyes at it a little bit looking back? Sure, but I still do agree with the underlying point that it is wrong to coddle adults as if they are children, but that is so common on today's college campuses. And I think it's a major reason that they're struggling to adapt to the actual workplace, which in most cases does not treat you like a child. It expects you to be an adult, to be able to do your own work, to not need somebody to hold your hand. But if you're jumping out of an environment that's still completely holding your hand into one where all of a sudden you're expected to be fully independent and autonomous, I think that's setting you up for failure. So I don't entirely blame Gen Zers because I also think the system here is failing them. And then, I mean, what do you expect? You expect people to be well adapted to a situation they've really never experienced? That doesn't seem super reasonable. So obviously individuals can do better and can step up and improve, but I do blame the system here as well. And in the many ways it's failed us and failed young people more generally. The other factor that I think's at play here is social media culture. I mean, on TikTok and on many of these other apps, you have young people posting basically memes about how they hate their job. People post themselves getting fired and laid off. People trash their employers. And there's this whole incentive structure where essentially doing things that are probably to your long-term detriment in terms of finding your next job or future employers will get you a super short-term like flush of endorphins from going viral or getting a lot of likes, but may harm you actually in the long run. And then there's also this meme subculture on TikTok and elsewhere on the internet where it's like almost lauded being lazy and it's almost celebrated if you actually can quiet quit and just barely do your job and barely try. And I think a lot of that leads young people astray. But what do you all think of this question of Gen Z in the workplace? Do you think it's just young people who are at blame, or do you think there are systemic problems here that make it more complicated? For me, it's something nuanced. It's something in the middle. I don't want to fully blame young people and tell them to just pick themselves up by their bootstraps, because it is more complicated than that. But I also don't want to let them entirely off the hook, because they still can and should do better. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and do hit that like button. And now we've got to talk about Trump and his Twitter haters who support Kamala, because Trump has just made them very mad by saying that he wants to abolish the Federal Department of Education. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We spend more money per pupil than any other country by far, and yet we're at the bottom of the list. Out of 40, we're ranked about number 40. And I'm going to close the Department of Education and move education back to the states. And we're going to do it fast.
So this isn't actually a new position. It's something Trump has said he wants to do many times over the years, although he didn't do it in his first term. So I don't know whether he would actually do it this time around. Maybe, but maybe not. Either way, it's something that every time Trump says it, absolutely sends people on the left into a meltdown mode. So this clip was shared by a very popular pro-Kamala account, Kamala's Wins, and they said, in a stunning announcement, Donald Trump just announced he is going to close down the Department of Education. Donald Trump wants to stop our children from getting an education. Retweet so all Americans can see this. And this was the general tone of the backlash on Twitter and elsewhere. Oh my gosh, Republicans hate education and want to stop our kids from going to school. And once again, I'm here to tell y'all to put down the crack pipe. Abolishing the Department of Education does not really affect the actual provision of education at the state and local level, which is where it almost all happens. The Department of Education is a bloated federal bureaucracy that writes rules and regulations and sets one-size-fits-all standards for the systems throughout the country, but almost all the actual funding is happening at the state and local level, and the Department of Education doesn't teach students, doesn't operate schools, doesn't employ teachers. All of that is state and local. And the Department of Education wasn't even created until about 1980. So unless you think that Americans just didn't get educations and schools just didn't exist before then the idea that the end of the Department of Education would mean the end of education in America is obviously not correct or true. And even when we talk about abolishing the Department of Education, a few of its features that actually do need to continue to happen would just be pushed into other departments and other agencies. For example, student loans would still be administered probably by the Treasury Department, which would probably do a better job at administering them, and many other things, right? So even if you abolished it, you'd be getting rid of maybe 70 or 80% of the things that it does, which is mostly red tape, waste, and bureaucracy, but the few core functions that maybe are still important would be preserved. It's not a complete and total abolition. And it would just be taking us a step closer to our actual proper role of our federal government, because Nothing in the Constitution, which lays out explicitly what powers the federal government has, and it's supposed to be an exhaustive list. Nothing in the Constitution authorizes a federal Department of Education or gives the federal government the ability, the authority to regulate and micromanage the state's education provision and departments. And if you got rid of the Department of Education, what would happen is that states and localities would have much more freedom and flexibility to do what they want in their schools and their education system. And in some places, it might work really well, and in some places, they might do poorly. But you know what? There'd be competition. People would move from state to state for better schools. Systems that did poorly would struggle, and there'd be a lot of pressure on them to change and do something differently. But instead, the status quo is that in many ways, the Department of Education forces a one-size-fits-all approach on everywhere from Maine to Alaska to California to Boston to Texas. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, if you ask me. So unlike some online Kamala supporters, I don't find Trump's position here particularly radical or controversial or upsetting at all. I think it's common sense, and I'd like to see it happen. Although, again, I'm skeptical that he'll actually follow through with it. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slug.
Today, jump scare warning, we're taking a look at another video from Lily Tino, the controversial trans TikToker who talked about their sex change and genital surgery at Disneyland. Yes, that happened. Lily Tino is back to educate us about pronouns and how they apparently don't have anything to do with gender after all. Let's take a look.
Welcome to Ask a Trans Girl, the show where I answer your questions. Let's listen to today's voicemail.
Hi, I'm sorry if this comes off offensive. This is like a genuine question. I know that a lot of people believes that gender and pronouns are two different things. For example, you could be a male and go by she, her pronouns. Do you also believe that? And if you do, why you get upset whenever people call you him or he?
First off, the question was not offensive. I'm happy to answer it. A man can absolutely use she, her pronouns. There's no link between what pronouns you use and what gender you are. So why do I get offended when someone calls me he? You might have seen the videos of me getting misgendered in restaurants. A lot of times people will criticize my reaction in those videos and say, well, how could the server have known that you were she, her, and not he, him? What am I suggesting here? What's the change? What's the thing that the server could have done? The server could have not called me he or she. You don't need to say hello, sir, or hello, ma'am. Just say, hey, how's it going? What can I get for you? And why do I get upset? It's because I'm a human being with human feelings, and when someone says something that hurts me, I say something about it, because otherwise it simmers and festers, and no one likes that. Anyways, hope that helped.
The comments on this video were absolutely savage. One person said, "This is very informative. Thank you, sir." Another person wrote, "Dude, take your meds." "Thanks, sir. I learned a lot." This makes zero sense. Why would you call a man who also identifies as a male she? Stop putting crap like this on the internet or some kid will see this and actually believe what you say. Another person, "Did you ever think that maybe like no one cares? We literally do not care what you identify as. I identify as a lesbian raccoon. Who cares?" Another person finally just said, "Oh my God, please stop making content for the love of everything holy." So there's a lot here, but boy, everything about this is just incoherent beyond belief. A man using she, her pronouns makes no sense because you're using pronouns that refer to a woman, but you're saying you're a man. That would be like me going around and telling everybody that I'm a journalist, not a doctor, and yet demanding that people refer to me as Dr. Brad. People would look at me like I'm insane and speaking nonsense, because I would be insane and speaking nonsense. And the idea that there's no link between your pronouns and what gender you are, it totally contradicts everything the pronoun people and the alphabet mafia have been telling us for years. If there's no link, then why do people need to ask you your pronouns to affirm your gender? Why do you need to go by different pronouns? Why don't you just keep going by he and him then, even if you're a trans woman? If there's no link, why does it matter? And Lily never actually explained why Lily cares when people use the wrong pronouns for Lily, because if pronouns have nothing to do with your gender, why is it even misgendering? Why do we even call it that? It's not misgendering if it has nothing to do with gender. So people can call you he and him and has nothing to do with your gender, so why is it offensive? Now, Lily tries to say that just because, well, they didn't have to use a pronoun at all, but that doesn't seem like a good reason to be offended. No, you're offended because you identify as a woman and then you want people to use pronouns that correspond with that, but then you get offended if they don't, which I think that's their right to not use them, but you have a right to feel however you want about it as well, I guess. But you can't then say that pronouns have nothing to do with gender. The math is not mathing. 2 plus 2 is not 5, babe. This is the problem I have with a lot of this TikTok content from the more extreme LGBT people, is they don't even bother to make sense. And if your message and your movement fundamentally does not make sense at just a basic logical coherence level, nobody's going to buy it. Nobody's going to support your community. Nobody's going to support your cause. So then is it any wonder that LGBT acceptance is going down, not up, for the first time in my lifetime? I don't think it is. I think it's the inevitable result of peddling incoherent woke nonsense for millions of people to view on the internet every day. When stuff like this, that fundamentally doesn't make any sense and is absurd to anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together, when stuff like this is the face of the community, rightly or wrongly, online, it gives fuel to the haters and it gives a false impression to the world that all LGBT people will just live in Delulu land like Lily Tino so clearly does. I can't stand it, and I just think that if people like this actually cared about acceptance of transgender people or gay people or lesbian people or bisexual people, the best thing they could do is delete their account and stop posting videos. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and do like this video to reward my suffering through this insanity. All right, guys, now I'll round up today's show with a few of your comments from the last episode. One person says, I'm a libertarian and my husband is a Democrat. The idea we should get divorced because we disagree on a lot politically is insane. Besides, even if you find another person's beliefs reprehensible, alienating them only drives them further into their ideas. If change is really going to happen, we all need to take a page out of Daryl Davis's book and humanize the people on the other side of the aisle. You know, talk to them like they're actually people. I completely agree. And for guys, if you don't know, Daryl Davis is the black guy who goes around befriending KKK members and then gets them to give it up and actually collects the hoods of people he's gotten to leave the KKK. It's a really beautiful, wonderful story. And exactly this point, that you got to get close to people and connect with them despite your differences if you're ever hoping to bridge a divide rather than just widen it even further. Another person writes, haha, that's the guy that wrote the foreword for White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, so that checks out. I didn't know this, that Michael Eric Dyson, by the way, guys, I apologize. I kept saying Eric Michael Dyson on the show yesterday. That was a mistake, my bad. It's Michael Eric Dyson. I didn't know he wrote the book, the foreword for White Fragility, that crazy book by that crazy anti-racist grifter Robin DiAngelo, but actually, that makes so much sense. Looking now in hindsight, it really does. Another person says, what is your view on the legalization of prostitution, Brad? Well, I've always been supportive of the idea of decriminalizing prostitution because I don't think that women who are caught up in the system should be punished or thrown in jail. And I also think that criminalizing it allows them to be abused and not be able to go to police when they're being harmed. So I've always supported decriminalization. Legalization, I have mixed feelings about, so I'm not quite sure if I'm fully on board with that, but decriminalization for sure. Another person says, it's impressive you have enough content that's relevant, bizarre, and informative to be able to do practically daily episodes. Yeah, you know, sometimes I struggle a little bit to find something I care enough to talk about that I think people would be interested in, but less than I thought, honestly, because there's just so much nonsense and insanity going on in this world. Another person says, this may be a stupid question, but what is your favorite food and color while you're at it? My favorite food is definitely buffalo chicken. I love anything buffalo chicken, sandwich, salad, buffalo chicken wings, buffalo chicken tenders, anything like that. My favorite color is probably green, though I also like a blue. Another person says, there's nothing more hilariously hypocritical than watching progressives lament about cancel culture. Yeah, I don't believe in canceling even woke progressives because I stand in my principles against it, but it is a bit rich when you see people complaining about getting canceled who have themselves, for years, encouraged the cancellation of conservatives. It's like, babe, you played yourself at least a little bit. All right, everybody, that is it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go. Do comment with your thoughts. I do take the time to read the comments. Always love to hear what you guys have to say. But with that, we'll talk again tomorrow.